Hi.
Hi, Yael. Hi, everyone. Varda has asked for a 10-minute extension until 7:10, as we wrote to you. So if you want to do some arrangements at home until 7:10, you can do that. If you want to ask questions, we are here. That's also a possibility.
Hi, Professor Libai.
Hi, Moshik.
Just wanted to ask about the paperwork that we submitted, just for us to get the feedback and to learn from the feedback for the next individual or group work. When do you expect such feedback can be available?
No, we will not. This would be different since we changed the nature of the case due to the situation. Originally, it was supposed to be a two-person case in which would be a bit longer and you answer. We made it just a pass-fail. So the feedback would be a discussion in class today. We don't think, if you really need to talk about something personally on that, I can look at yours. But generally on that, just if you wrote to the points, you get the points. I don't think you need it for the other assignments. It's very different. So it was just more to create a discussion in class. We changed it in that sense, and we don't check and give feedback to everyone. We don't give a grade as well, just pass-fail. And if someone fails for it's really bad or something that completely not connected to the point, we'll send you an email. For sure.
Professor, okay. do we gonna discuss it more longer during the class? Because this is one. Okay, great.
Yeah. So indeed, and you are welcome then to. And I'll raise the questions that I asked. And you are welcome to make a point. Rafael, do you sell to hospitals typically?
No, but basically, I think that it's a pain that at every moment a company needs to have, meaning that do we need to compete on the price, or do we need to add value services in order to get out of this infernal circle? So I mean, it could be applied to any kind of patient, customer, provider. So
actually, it's not only patients. I use this case sometimes in classes which are completely not related to healthcare, and because it's a general story. I mean, it happens so that you are from the industry, many of you. But
exactly, from my perspective, for example, I'm from the clinical trial industry, or CRO industry. We're making clinical trials on behalf of a pharmaceutical company, and at some point, when it's a competitive market, and or you can compete by price, and you're getting into this infernal circle, which in order to receive more and more clients, you need to make discount over discount over discount, and at the end, you're not free, and you go to bankruptcy. So, I mean, it's talked to me a lot. This case talked to me a lot.
You know, it's an issue, and of course, in your program is very condensed, and it deals only with certain things. But for example, in the regular program here, we have a course on pricing, and with Eyal Belagoski, who is a real expert on that. And it's interesting, people don't realize how much pricing is the whole world. And it's really a fascinating course. Typically, I tell students, if you take one elective course in marketing, take this course, because price is connected to the bottom line more than anything else. And there is a world there are all kinds of pricing mechanism and thinking, and how do you deal with that? And not always there are good solutions, of course, but generally pricing is a very important issue that people think, I just set the price. It's not like that. It's and again, this is not the emphasis here, pricing mechanisms, but it's something that we can raise. Maybe in the class we'll find some good advice on how to deal. I'm sure that people that saw it from both sides. How was you had now a lecture from someone who is in Johnson & Johnson, right?
Correct.
I think, and Did he tell you new things about the corona that you didn't know before?
He get back on several things in terms of development. I wasn't aware of the development of several therapeutics and vaccines, so it was interesting. But on the virus itself, I mean, you talk about a case in the US where it seems that the virus went to aerosolized.
Mm-hmm.
So this is new form of, but it's not proven yet, so we don't have to be afraid of anything. That's it from my side. I don't know for the others.
Professor Libai, I would like to go back to the prices issue.
Yes.
I know the class hasn't been started, but yet, do you know of any product that the company developed an IP or even wrote a patent which regarded to the price of the product?
It's rather hard to write IP on ideas like that. It can be if there is a specific pricing mechanism which is very different. I don't know. It's an interesting question. So I don't know that the price would be the IP, but if you have a very specific pricing idea that nobody had before, even that, it would not be easy to write as much as I know, but maybe. I think it's rather easy today in Google Scholar. You go into Google Scholar, and Google Scholar today includes also patents. So if you limit yourself to patents and you look for price mechanism or something like that, I think that you can get a relatively easy answer. And I think that it's not trivial. There is something which, you can take it as you want, but I think that one of the advantages of being in the MBA program at IDC is that you can take courses in the future also by being a free participant, or maybe even not, I don't know. So if pricing is interesting for you, there is a course by, again, Professor Eyal Bialagorsky, which I think should be given next year. This year he's in a sabbatical. Unfortunately for him, he's in Spain, but he somehow made it to Israel on time. But I would really, really consider just sitting on the course. It is really eye-opening for people who took it. The whole idea of how pricing is built and pricing mechanisms, and it's a bit quantitative, not too much. And generally, the evaluations from last years are really, really good for this course. So I would consider next year to sit on the course. And I think it is a really good idea. I think that pricing we talked about the 4 Ps, and people to a large extent equate marketing with promotions, which is of course not only this, and sometimes with place, but price seems to be something that in some cases it's not even marketing responsible. I know that for example, in a global McDonald's, the person who sets the price is the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. Because people think, it's money, so maybe the finance people should deal with that. But that's a big mistake. That's a big mistake because the management of pricing, pricing really reflects the value to the customer that the customer is willing to get, and you need to understand value very well. Value might change among segments, and the perception of cost may change very much due to the way that we present it. And of course, and I think we'll talk about it today as well in a short while, what we see today more and more are products which start for free, which was something that people began to write about 15 years ago. There's a famous book which is called Free by Anderson, who was the editor of Wired. And he suggests that in digital worlds, we'll see an increasing situation where people will not charge for the product early on. And I must say that when I read it for the first time, I said, this is nice, these are nice examples, but he's out of his mind, then he was right. I mean, if you look today, for example, at software, so if you look at the web, at smartphones, for example, games. Now
we can look on Google. Google started as a free search engine.
Yes, and
today
quite a lot of money.
Yeah, today they charge the customers.
But it's not only Google. I mean, if you look at games on smartphones today, now you, again, people might say, you know, games. Games are the largest category on apps, and the smartphone game market is larger than the global movie and music industry combined. And more than 90% of games start for free. So the model,
the freemium model. It's
the freemium model, and not people call freemium different things. Sometimes it's not a freemium, sometimes you make the money from advertising. But it's clear for them that now more or less the conventional wisdom is that you cannot charge money almost always for a product when it goes out in this market. You need to start it free and then see how you make money. So again, it's a really change of a business model, something that we hadn't seen 15 years ago. And I think it's connected somehow to what I'll talk about in the second part of today's course, which is customer profitability. People realize that there are different ways to get to customer profitability. So we'll wait 1 minute more and then we'll start. Let's see that. Second. All right, let's say a few things before we begin. First of all, thanks for coming. Most of you are here, and maybe a few more would join. It's really not trivial these days, so I really appreciate it. And I know it's not easy to sit so many hours in front of Zoom. And a few issues on that. First of all, as I said, we'll do 50 minutes and then 10 minutes break and so on. So we will try not to be more than 50 minutes in one time. If generally, if you feel you need to leave, it's fine, either for a few minutes, or even if you want to leave the class and then watch it afterwards, I give you the legitimacy. It's fine, because I know that people have other things later in the evenings. And also, those of you who watch it afterwards, it's also fine not to make it to class. And I know some people are in the front line of the coronavirus fight. We communicated with them, so we wish them all the best, of course, and they can watch it afterwards. And I'll see how much I go on with the class, but it might be that some slides I'll just record afterwards and then give you a link. Now, I want to say regarding the left assignment, so there are two of them, the Cymbalta case and the individual level case, which will be given in the last class. And the individual level case is less problematic time-wise, because we can be flexible with the dates, as long as we don't need to provide a final grade yet. The Cymbalta is less flexible in the sense that we go into it in class. We'll go into it in class right after Passover. And through the case, really, we discuss the issues of segmentation and positioning. So it will be less relevant to do it after we discuss it in class. So first of all, luckily we have 3 weeks for that, which is quite a lot, and some of you may have started. We don't do it right after Passover. The next meeting is 3 weeks from today, so it's quite a time. You're in groups, so you can help each other. In case that you feel, if you're in the front line of the coronavirus in the hospital, and you feel there's no way you can work on the Cymbalta case in these times, what I suggest is that you contact us and we'll think with the program management what can be done. We'll have to see what can we do. Maybe we'll give you later a larger case, groups. We'll have to see. What we'll do today is we'll finish with customer acquisition, discuss the escaping discount rate short case, and move to customer profitability. Now, regarding the communications, it's your choice. I find it useful that at least some cameras are open, so I feel I talk to people. I think it helps my concentration, but I realize some prefer closed videos given the activity at home. So whatever you decide, and you can be in video and just put it off, whatever, the kids come in or not, your choice. Please continue to use the chat as you did last class, and as we did, Yael would be managing it. And I may not be able to answer every question that you ask, or give you every comment, because we're constrained, of course, but I will try to answer at least some. Please be patient with the, I'll see if I need to make Yael, here she is, the co-host. So please be patient when you ask questions. From time to time, Yael will interrupt me, but sometimes I just need to finish something before I deal with that. When we'll talk about the case, probably you'll talk more freely. Questions? So we just start. And let's put everything here. So let's start. So we are dealing with customer acquisition. And if you recall, last time I presented the diffusion models, which we use in marketing and of course are related to models in epidemiology. And the basic idea, I'll go quickly about the last part of the lecture last time. So I presented the BUS model, which is one model. There can be others, but maybe the most used in marketing. Very simple, very general, of course, can be extended. So the idea is that you have always the number of potential adopters that can be affected, and you have the ways to affect them, one of which is the independent effect, which is independent from any other previous adopters, like advertising, for example. And there is the effect of previous adopters. The number of previous adopters, of course, affect the current adopters. And in the case of a disease, the number of infected people affect those who are not infected yet. And what we see here is the number of people that will adopt at period T will depend on these factors, depend on the market potential, how many people adopted until now, and of course, the share of people that have already adopted. And what I said is that generally it's a trade-off, because the more people that adopt, the more people that can affect, but then there are fewer people that can be affected. So it's a trade-off, and we see it when we look at the BUS model, for example, in the bell-shaped. In the beginning, there are more people to to affect. It might be slow in the beginning because not so many people are there already affected and can affect others. And then it goes fast up, but then it begins to go down because the number of people who can be affected goes down. And I told you that it had been used in marketing to mainly try to understand what are the parameters, the P and Q, the individual and the social effect in different markets. We talked about the fact that actually the price might change over time or the quality, but this is reflected in the average values of the individual and social effects. And of course, you can build models that can take these changes into account. The question is, can we use it to anticipate new product growth shape? So there are two main options: either look at similar products at other markets and see what happened there. You can look at values of maybe historic values even of P and Q in other markets, and then begin to try to understand what is the difference, main difference among markets. Do we see a consistent pattern? You can look at different products in the same market and then do some, use an analogy to do some updates. And of course, as the product begins to grow, you update your predictions. At the end of the day, these are predictions. So we must remember that. I mean, we're not magicians. We cannot really look into the future and see what will happen. We use the information that we have. We make analogies from everywhere that we can, and we update it as we go on. As I mentioned, the note in the readings talks about, presents a way, for example, where it had been done. And of course, the more we know about the individual social network level, then we can make better assumptions. In today's world, people like me, for example, are using large-scale simulations on the individual level to look at new product growth. So I don't look only at the aggregate level, but I try to see how the individual level social network might affect the way that growth would look like. And I think this is much done also today with the coronavirus and by epidemiologists for sure, where we try to look at individual social system, certain towns or areas, or even smaller social systems to see how they affect growth. We began to talk about some insights on diffusion. I mentioned that early on we used to see a longer left tail before things started. We see it less today because diffusions are faster, communication is greater, companies know how to introduce new products. We talked about the K factor, how it changes over the life cycle, how many new customers affect, how many new customers a current customer brings via social process, and which is called the K factor and is used in viral marketing. And I said that if it's larger than one, then the whole thing explodes, of course. If it's lower than one, it will converge. And what we can expect that even if it's larger than one early on, it will go down. It will go down for two reasons. One of them is heterogeneity, that the people who are more prone to be affected are affected first, so it's not representative. And the second one is that the market saturates. So people will find it harder and harder to find in their own social network others to affect, because so many people have already adopted. Lastly, we talk about continuously used products where we need to take churn into account. So the bus model becomes a bit more complicated. You just need to add a churn rate, which is the amount of people that leave. And it's no, I don't go into it, but if you need it, if you, instead of getting the number of new adoptions, you get the number of users, you can deduct for that, if you know the churn rate, the bus model parameters. And of course, we can use all of that also to look at the coronavirus, but for now still, like last week, I don't think that we have the numbers outside that we really need in order to see fully what's going on. So this is what we talked about. I want to mention a few other issues which are related to the growth of innovations. And one of them, someone might have mentioned it in one of your courses, there is a very well-known theory coming of Silicon Valley in the early 1990s, which talks about the chasm. So the idea is the following. The idea I showed you this graph, this bell-shaped curve, and we talked about innovators, early adopters, and so on. So a book that has been published in '91 by Geoffrey Moore, who was an investor and active in Silicon Valley, suggested that in B2B products, in particular technological products, but maybe not only, you may have a break in the curve. He suggested that there are actually two kinds of markets that you face. There's the early market and the mainstream market. The early market, which are the innovators and early adopters, are the people who see the full glass. So they really understand that when a new product comes into the market, it's a new product, it's not ideal, it's not full, but it's really an opportunity. And they're willing to adopt it early on, even when it's not all finished. The mainstream market, which is the rest of the market, does not necessarily think that way. They want what Moore called the whole product solution. They say this is very nice, new products, but I need a product which has the best features, pricing is good enough, support is great. I cannot play with the idea of new products that might get better. And what is even more important, Moore claims, the mainstream market does not really rely on the early market necessarily. So they say these people are nice, they like new technologies. I want to see people like me, meaning companies like me that adopt it. Don't tell me a story about this small high-tech company that adopted your great new enterprise software. I want to see a supermarket chain like mine that adopted your product. So, and the claim of Moore is that if managers don't realize it, they begin to see a rise and they're very happy and enthusiastic, and then suddenly it falls because the mainstream market wants a new thing. What he suggests is that you actually need to begin to build the growth from the beginning with the mainstream market to some extent. So you learned a lot from the early market, but then you will need to work hard to get the first customers again in the mainstream market, and then to show to other mainstream market members that you have already customers there. There are claims that if you look at Israeli products, for example, new products, Israeli technology companies know quite well how to deal with the early market. So they have a good technology, very good ideas. The product is not completely finished, but they make it to the early market. But it's much harder to get into the mainstream market, which demands much investments in getting in and a different kind of thinking of how to convince managers to adopt. And therefore, when they reach this point, they would rather sell themselves to Microsoft or Google or someone else who knows how to deal with the mainstream market rather to make the investment needed to penetrate it. Now, it may not be correct for every product, of course. What people argue, this is part of an article which I was a part of at the time, that what you will see actually in the market is maybe not a complete chasm between the markets, but what we call a saddle. So the early market, for example, it was in PCs, the early market begins to grow, and then the mainstream market is only partly affected, and on the way up, it will go down for a while until the mainstream market really begins to grow. And one of the implications is that if you have this story and you see the going down here, it may not be the end of the product. It may be just the moving from the early to the mainstream, so you must be patient and you must try to understand really what is going on. Is it just that we now need to move to another type of market? So, and again,
Barak,
yes.
About the prices and the curve when it goes down after the first hill, is there any meaning or reason because of market training, or educated, or some obstacles and the company decided to adjust prices?
It can also be. It can also be that there are some company-related issues, which are very unique to that company. I mean, it can go up and down, but generally, look at what we analyze here. This is not a specific company. This is a big market, the PC market, then the VCR market, or the cordless telephone. So these are large markets. So probably one company wouldn't move it so much. It has to be something bigger. What we saw,
maybe it's expectation.
it might, I think, again, you can have other explanations. What we saw that we have this kind of saddles in about a third of the markets that we looked at. So most of them didn't have it, but about a third had it. And we argued that if you believe more, and this is quite a strong theory in Silicon Valley, I mean, people accept it, and he had some other books about it afterwards. If you believe the idea of an early and mainstream market, you will expect that to some extent. Unless the product is so good that the mainstream market adopts it immediately, there may be a time when in the move from the early to the mainstream market, and to some extent you talk about educating a market. The question is which market? What Moore claims is you think you educated the early market, but actually you need a new education for the mainstream. It's not the same market. And they are not affected. This whole chain of social influence is not working that well because these kind of customers are very different from these kind. They don't necessarily talk too much or look at them.
When I'm saying educating the market, meaning maybe the market was not exist before, and once it get to a critical mass, a critical point where the manufacturer move to mass production, then the companies could provide supplies with less prices, or reduced prices, and then it's increased the market by much higher numbers. And
yes, and we see that actually part of, I told you about the extensions to the bus model. Some of the extensions deal with exactly what you described here. It's if you think about it, and it's happening in many markets. There is an increase in the utility of price to quality. I mean, price goes down, quality might go up, or at least price goes down. So the market becomes larger with time. You can think about it in two ways. Either the parameters that govern the pace change, so P and Q would go up, or the market potential goes up. So the market potential was small to begin with, and then it increases with time. But then you don't necessarily see this saddle. So the saddle, what you will see that the general shape stays more or less the same, but it will change. It will be different kind of a bell shape. It does not necessarily explain why you have a saddle like that unless the price and quality changes also follow some kind of a saddle, or if the mainstream market did not consider the product until price to quality made it to a certain threshold, and only then the diffusion there started. It can be also. I don't try to sell a general theory of new products because there are so many things that are happening, but I'm trying to show it from different angles. So the saddle is one of them. And again, if you're interested in this area, this is a really readable book. You know, it's not very academic or something, but it's a really influential book. It's from 1991, but people really look at it as sort of, some people, as a Bible until today. And he has some other books later on how to deal with that. It's a smart book. So take a look. Another way to look at markets from another angle is the fact that we need to understand that sometimes we need to take a generational view. So if we look at the market, for example, for game consoles, we might see a bell shape, but actually the market is composed of generations of technologies that one of them replaces the other. And then again, we have models for that to look at how they replace, because nowadays, you look, for example, here, the PS1 in the middle. So the PS1, probably there are two issues that are happening there. It probably was good enough to get into the market people who were not playing before, but also to get the people who were before playing other games. So they moved from the current game to the new game. So it's a combination of both. And this is how generations grow. And this is an example of healthcare application, which I saw recently, where people try to anticipate how electronic health records adoption among US hospitals would be in the coming years. And what they did, as you see here, they forecasted it using the bus model. So they, probably looking at past examples, looked at different stages. Each one is a bus model with a different P, Q, and M. And of course, I guess marketing people, and maybe they did it as well, would use a complicated analysis where each stage affects also the other stage, but for simplicity, you can make them independent. So again, I'm just touching a small part of our ability to look at diffusion of innovations. It's a whole discipline. But just to give you the idea that we can dive more into how markets for new products grow. And finally, we can even ask ourselves, is it always a bell shape? Because all these models, the Moore and the others, and the one that I see in healthcare, typically assume a bell shape. And I can tell you that not always we see that. This is the example of some products that I analyzed. And I see it in some places where instead of a bell-shaped, adoptions go down with time. So they start the highest in the beginning. And this is against the whole idea of diffusion of innovation, that early on you don't have so many people and they reduce the risk for others and they're affected. What do you think? When can that happen? Anyone has any hunch of when will we see a market where adoptions are highest in the beginning and then they go down exponentially?
Hi, maybe in a market where there are lots of imitations, like a product that is easy to create, and so yeah, and
but,
so.
Osnat, then I have a question, but in order to imitate, I see imitation, I see a fast-going bell-shaped, I understand that it's fast imitation. But here, these people in the beginning, there's no one to imitate. How come there's so many of them? Excuse me?
Maybe a trend product. For example, if we look at the application for the coronavirus, you will have a high adoption rate at the beginning because of the situation. And then more the treat will go away, more the adoption will decrease over time.
But how, Rafael, how would people know? I mean, if nobody has adopted it, how can they be affected by others? How would they know so that the adoption in the first day would be the highest?
Or if it's a new product that is going into a niche that is very, I mean, that has very high demand, you know, if it goes and answers a question that people need answer to, and then very quickly, I'm going back to my previous idea, has imitations. So maybe the first product, you know, was solving the problem, but not as good as the new products that are imitating it. And so the demand goes down.
It may be, I agree that it would be maybe a very fast bell shape that would look something like that, but still you would not start in such a case with the highest demand early on because you need to imitate someone. What I'm getting at, I think that this is something that we see mostly in recent years, and I related to what I call the age of anticipation. If you think about historically, what was my assumption in the bus model and other models that did? They say there's a product, goes on into the market, the information about the product begin to diffuse from the people who adopt it. But what happens if the information is there before the product begins to enter the market. Look at, for example, movies. This is the movie Borat at the time, and people measured the search for the name, the pre-launch buzz, and you see that and you see the sales. You see that overall, you have sort of a bell shape that includes the pre-launch buzz, but when Borat already entered the market, people talked about it a lot. So what happens today is that people know about the product often much before it comes out, at least some products. So my son is playing video games. When a video game comes out in December, people are talking about it for months. Opinion leaders get it and put movies, and people speculate how it would look like. And the company releases all kinds of information. When it comes out, everybody knows what it will be, and then people want it early, of course, to feel that they are the first, and you'll see that kind of a trend, and you can see it in cases when you have pre-orders, for example. So all the pre-orders would start in a certain day, or even think of Kickstarter. What do you have with Kickstarter? It's also about anticipation. People pay money, and then after some time, they say, okay, so the product will get out next July. When it finally gets out next July, and everybody talked about it and paid money, early on would be the highest demand. But even regular products, think of the first iPhones or other products, people wait for them today. And companies manage the buzz before time. And so in such cases, we will have a decreasing function. And what is interesting, which may be counterintuitive, is that the largest you fall, it shows that you did a better job. Because if there was a lot of engagement before and everybody waited, and then they got it on the first week or day, then of course there will be a fall afterwards. It only shows the engagement, maybe not that you do a bad job and the new sales are falling. And finally, I want to give an example of a research that was done in that sense in the medical field. And they looked at a new drug coming to the market. And what they analyzed is they said there are two types of segments: patients with severe health problems and patients with mild problems. Now, the physicians know about the upcoming drug in advance. They're not very sure how it would be effective for everyone, but they are clear that people with severe health problems must try it. So when the physicians hear about it before, and then when the drugs comes, many of them write prescriptions right away. So there's a lot of demand early on, but then they begin to look if it fits the mild problem patient. So here there is a learning curve. They are not sure. They want to see, they learn for each other. So it's the combination of the two markets, but clearly, in this case, early on, you will see that the market is the largest, the demand the largest. What you might have afterwards is going down and then going up again. So it might be. But so generally, in cases where the information is spreading before the product begins, and we see it in many products today. We see it in companies manage that. You might see a case where the classic bell shape is not what you will face.
But Professor Libai,
yes,
isn't it a strategy for market access, meaning to prepare, as Moshik intervened before, to prepare the market before introduction of the product on the market?
You want to do that. So first of all, people do it today more than before. The question is how much the market, you can prepare as much as you want, and this will help you with the first adopters, how much people would need to see other adopters before they adopt. Because you can go to meetings and conferences and so on, explain that your product is great. Most clients often would still not be the first one to buy. Not everybody wants to be the innovator or the early adopter. In such a case, you will have more the bell shape. If you really convince the market early on, you say you do a pro market, then you may have an exponential decline, like I showed you, because everybody would want it early on. It's a good question. It's an empirical question. It's not trivial to create this on your own. Clearly, what companies are doing today more and more is a lot of work on pre-announcements, on buzz, on managing forums and social media in order to create the legitimacy to adopt it even before other people adopt it. It's not trivial, even today. So
is it free? Meaning this strategy is worth the cost?
It depends where. It depends where. If you want to be in the market early, it's worth it. The question if it's worthwhile. We see some markets where it's more acceptable. So games, for example, entertainment products. Sometimes here you saw with the drugs when the physician know for sure, they have the FDA, so they believe the FDA, they don't need other physicians necessarily. You see cases where there are pre-orders. In such cases, it works. In other cases, it's a case by case. I cannot tell you if it's worthwhile or not. It depends on the market. Other questions on that? So,
Sorry?
Yes.
Hey,
Of course.
Beatrice.
Hi, Beatrice.
Hi, sorry. Just to say that I think for pharma industry and drugs, it's more or less obvious that the physicians more or less know the drug before it's launched because they read the clinical trials, they read results of clinical trials and so on. So it depends if they are linked to the hospital and so on. But more or less, when the products arrives, is launched on the market, they're already pre-launch with specialists. As you said, they know the drug, and now they want to try to see how does it work with their patients and so on and so on. And there is this adoption curve, which is very important because they are more or less testing the products.
Yes. And what they said there, that really for severe customers, they're willing to take the chance and give it early on. I remind you what I said before in the last class, I think, that one of the first analyses of diffusion of innovation had been done with physicians in the 1950s. And there we saw that physicians were highly affected by each other when adopting the antibiotics. So even it was such a great medicine, everybody was clear that it can do a lot, but still they were not taking chances until they saw that some other physicians are doing it. So yes, even with all the FDA and so, people still look at others.
We can see the numbers sales representative that pharma company pay in order to promote the product. I mean, yes. They don't just base this on clinical trials results. They need to also oversell the drug.
And one of the roles of the, if you think about it, of the detailing people is to tell the physician, if they can, look at who are the other people that adopted. So physicians would not necessarily know who other people, what the other people that adopted. The pharma companies want to create the social influence. So they can have various ways, or one of the ways to show, you see this and this and this already adopted it, so you create the sort of trend in the market, the person-to-person influence. The last thing that I want to talk about in the context of diffusion is the issue of network effects. And I want to talk about this gentleman that we all know, Mark Zuckerberg. Here he is in the question in the Senate, he's not that happy, but before that, for sure, he was happy. And I want to talk about the days of happiness, of course. And there were good reasons to be happy because Facebook went up in price more and more. You see with time, it began at 300 billion and so on, and then $500 billion. Today is a bit more even. And my question is why? Because think about the following, when analysts and others, the stock market, provides a company such a high price, they assume that this company is here to stay. It's not just something that they are good, but someone else might replace them tomorrow. Otherwise, they're not worth $500 billion. And the question is why? Because if you think about it, Facebook doesn't have any patent really. I mean, they have a lot of information on individuals, but other companies can also create firms where individual level data can be collected. What is it about Facebook that the market values so much? Why are they worth so much? Anyone has an idea?
Maybe because so many people are on it around the world.
And then?
Huge
And
market
then they
penetration.
put advertisements.
Yeah, but Randy, here's the question. I mean, you can argue there are many companies which had many customers and then they just disappear. You know, people try it and on it. Is there something here that says that people are on it, but they will not leave?
Yeah, it's a social network, so everyone wants to be in. So
influence.
They will stay for.
But why don't I build, instead of Facebook, I build the Barak book, and then everybody would move to me, wouldn't they?
Because they don't have a real competition in their to their platform, at least.
Why not?
Because they keep doing better, they keep staying relevant, they keep growing bigger their audiences, they keep their competition low.
They buy the competition.
They buy the competition.
They buy the competition, yeah.
In opposed to other and not more recent, but earlier social platforms, they don't just stay and try to be only the best at what they do, but they keep expanding. They don't just freeze and wait for other companies to join in or to take part of it.
And still, and I agree to everything that you say, but I want to raise another issue which is related to some of the things that you said, and which is called network effect or network externalities. And network effects exist when the value of the product for a person depends on the number of other users. And this is the story of Facebook to a large extent. Maybe there's a new network or a native platform like that, and maybe it's very nice and so. But the value of Facebook for me stems from the fact that other friends of mine are on Facebook. Without it, Facebook has no value for me. Actually, the value stems from the others.
Sorry, I have a question.
Okay, just a second, and then we'll get to it. And you can think about the communication products, for example, which is direct network externality, where I value the product more because, like Facebook, there are so many others that are connected, or indirect, like hardware, software, that the more others that use the product, then there's more software. In both cases, the product's value for me is a function of the others, and then it's harder for me to leave if the others don't leave as well. Okay, the question, Nicole? Nicholas, or whoever
no,
it was?
it's Nadia.
Nadia.
Isn't it a little counterintuitive? Because, for example, I've heard my kids say, "Oh, you on Facebook? I don't want to go there because my parents are there. I don't want to go there." So it's a
of course,
two-edged sword.
Oh, it's also no, it is, and one of the reasons that you talked about they buy the competitors. One of the reasons that Facebook was very willing to pay so much money for WhatsApp, for example, or for Instagram, is that they know that there is an issue that there can be a trend going out. But still, I mean, they keep people like us as still inside, and when the fact that it's network externality does not mean that you cannot have competition. It just means that it's harder to compete with you because you need a trend that will change it. Growing children is such a trend. So the children did not grow in this network, and then they have a new kind of network. They can create a critical mass that will eventually take others from that network. So networks can be broken, but and Facebook understood that, and therefore they purchased other networks that might be a challenge. But generally, if you look at products in the market, what I want to argue that many of the new products that we see today, or the product in general, are network externalities. So it can be games like the World of Warcraft or Angry Birds. It can be Microsoft Office. There had been with time all kinds of products which try to imitate Office for free. There was Star Office and others, very, very nice, very close, very free. And still, people don't have it and don't use it. And the reason that people don't use it is if others don't have the Star Office, you cannot exchange files. And this is, by the way, some of the things that Microsoft was investigated for by the Federal Trade Commission in the US. Can someone do something against these network externalities? Because to some extent, network externalities may provide what they see as unfair advantage on new entrants. But again, Zoom. Nobody used Zoom until not nobody, people of course used it, but very few people used it until the coronavirus story. And now when other people have Zoom, the value of Zoom for me goes up very much. People talk about Yahoo, for example, in the chat, and it's a very interesting example because I remember I was at the MIT in 2001 talking, it was the early days of the internet, earlier than today at least, and I was talking to this famous professor there, and we were talking about competitive advantage, and he said, you know, at that time, don't know if anyone remembers, Yahoo was really strong, much stronger than Google that was just emerging. And he said, you know, take Yahoo, for example. I mean, who can break Yahoo? They're so strong. And of course, he was mistaken. And I think a difference between Yahoo at the time and Facebook today, for example, is that Yahoo didn't have network externalities. It was good. But then Google came, it was better search, so I moved to Google. I didn't care so much if my friends are on Yahoo or not. With Facebook, and I said again, I don't say that I value Facebook so and so, it's the market that values them. It's harder, even if they are not as good as they used to be, in order for someone to leave them, he needs to take or she needs to take into account the behavior of others, and this is really not trivial. So, so many of the products we see are network externalities. This is, for example, the example of fax machines. Fax machines entered the market in 1965 on regular phone lines, and everybody in early years expected it to be a hit early on, and it didn't. Now it was more expensive than today, it was larger than today, it was slower than today, but still, think of this new invention. And only in 1987, it really took off. And the story that people explain is the story of network externalities, because price went down with the time, other things did go down, but nothing really happened in 1987. What happened was sort of a critical mass that enabled people to begin to think that others have it. And you can see when you follow the journalist and what was written at that time, how at that time people begin to perceive that everybody has fax, at least in terms of businesses. And it just took off exponentially. So if you think about it, its network externalities are like word of mouth. You need others to adopt, either to provide word of mouth via when they talk, or just by their mere existence to give you value. And they can, to some extent, slower or decrease the pace of the new product. There was a question? The question, what can we do? We don't want the left tail of the fax, because companies want things to enter earlier, and they do want people not to wait until others will have it and adopt it. So we can think, if you think about a couple of options. One of them is price. And this option says, I will charge either a very low price or a no price in order to make people adopt. Think, for example, on Skype early on. Would people adopt Skype if it would charge money early on? I think it would take much more time. But the business model of Skype had been, let's give it for free, and then we'll make money out of some of them. We give it for free to take care of network externalities and word of mouth. So it's either price or very much advertising in the beginning, or focus. Or you can say, I look at specific areas and focus on them and begin to create the network externalities that are needed for the new product. And if you remember the movie, The Social Network, those of you who saw it, Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook in Harvard and a few more campuses, that's all. You may want some of you to mute yourself because if you don't talk. And so he focused on certain areas because he knew it needs to start network externalities. People will not adopt Facebook until others have it, but when you have a small group, you can convince them, you can more easily create the critical mass. I promise you 50-10, so we are at 50. So let's take a 10 minutes break. Then I'll talk about platforms, which is another more extended way to look at the network externalities. And then we'll move to the escaping the discount trap. So see you at 8 and 10 minutes. I'm still staying here if you want to ask questions or anything. All right. We're back to action. And what I want to talk about now is another kind of network externality that to some extent demonstrate it. You can look, there's this website that once asked, is your startup idea already taken? And they compared startup ideas by looking at how similar they are to either Uber, Tinder, Birchbox, or Airbnb. Now, Birchbox, for those who do not know, it's a company that mediates between brands and consumers. So they manage for brands the ability to send samples to consumers. So you can get some samples from a cosmetics company, for example, and Birchbox organizes that for the brands. Now, if you think of dogs, for example, so actually we have the Uber for dogs, or we had at the time. This was a startup. If you needed someone to walk your dog, they would do it for you. And then you had the Tinder for dogs, which is the bark buddy, which is if you want your dog to meet another dog when they go out. And you have the Birchbox for dogs, which you will get samples of dog food from companies. And you had the Airbnb of dogs, in which this company, Dog Vacancy, mediates between dog owners who want a place for the dog when they are on vacation and people who are willing to host dogs. So the idea was that startups have, many of them have one of these models, and in a general sense, this is a model which is different from the classic business model that was the base to what everybody did until years ago, which is the pipeline. Pipeline says I have a product, I manufacture it, I push it to the market through maybe wholesalers or retailers or salespeople, and then it gets to the customer that buys it. And here what we see are what we call multi-sided platforms. So the idea of a platform is to really match people or match companies. You have side one and side two. I don't manufacture anything, I don't do anything besides matching the two sides. And we give them access to each other. and platforms have existed for years. If you think, for example, about shopping mall. Shopping mall is a platform. The management of the mall mediates between stores who want to sell and people who want to buy. And also the same for newspapers. So the New York Times really mediated between advertisers that want to show their advertising and want people who are willing to look at them. So platforms have been here for a while, but it's nothing like today. So really technology reduced the need to own physical infrastructures in order to build platforms and make the use of platform much easier, to the extent that if you look at the new startups in Israel in the last 5 years, so many of them are platforms. Each semester when I teach, I have some students coming to me and saying, hey, I have a great idea for this product. And oftentimes it is a platform. And because the idea is they don't need to manufacture anything, to invest in building and so on, they just think of they can match someone to someone else. And of course, this is not only about internet games and dog walking. There's a lot of action also in the medical technology world about platforms that mediate among people with health data to companies that can use this data and other type of platforms. Platforms are really a new business model which has become very strongly represented in many markets. The problem, which gets us why we're talking about it, is a story of network externality, of a different kind than the simple one, but still network externality. And the platforms, if you think, have to acquire both buyers and sellers. And it's a chicken and egg problem. So you want to introduce something, you'll come to the buyers, for example, and say, why don't you join the platform? They'll tell you how many sellers do you have. You go to the sellers, they'll tell you how many buyers. And it's a real non-trivial issue. It's the really thing that really bothers many individuals try to open new initiatives in that sense. Think, for example, about OpenTable. OpenTable is a well-known application in the US that mediates between people who want to go to a restaurant and the restaurant, so they can order a table. OpenTable has almost gone broke early on because they tried to be all over, and then they came to restaurant owners who told them, I may adopt your idea, it's a nice idea, but please show me first that you have enough customers. And the customers were not willing to adopt until there are not enough restaurants. So what they did at the end is to concentrate. They changed their CEO, and he said, I'm going only after Chicago early on. So he focused on Chicago, went after the restaurants first, and gave them the product really large discounts and so on. And when he had a critical mass there, then he could work more on individuals that would join, and then he created a platform, and then he could diffuse out of Chicago to other areas. So the area of concentration, and we talked about Facebook, how Mark Zuckerberg also concentrated early on. Another example is PayPal. PayPal started, again, a platform that mediates between people who want to pay in businesses and businesses as a payment mechanism that would make it safe for the payers, but it was very hard to get both sides early on. Then they concentrated on eBay, which eventually also purchased them, and they made it. So they created the critical mass on eBay, which enabled them to start really the diffusion of the product. So if you think about ways to start platforms, multi-sided markets on the way to critical mass, there are a couple of strategies. One of them is try to push both sides at the same time. YouTube was the issue when it started, did that. So it was a platform. You needed people to upload videos, and you needed people to watch the videos. So they tried to push both of them to promise to uploaders that there are enough people, and to people that here come the videos, and they try to do it at the same time, and it worked in their case. In some cases, it's a two-step strategy. So OpenTable, as I told you, focused more when they started in Chicago to signing up restaurants. And then when they could convince them, they began to focus on customers. And then there can be a commitment strategy. So when you are strong enough in your brand and your name, you can promise things. For example, Microsoft in the video game market, when they have a new console, the game developers may not want to develop games until there are enough consoles sold in the market. Now, Microsoft is worried that if there will not be enough games, there will not be enough consoles. So they committed to buying games from the game developers, even if there are not enough consoles. So this is another strategy. Other tactics, you can supply the product yourself. For example, Apple early on with the App Store. Early on, again, there were not enough apps for people to join the App Store, so Apple created them. They didn't wait for app developers. They created apps, and then when there are enough apps, people joined, and then the other app developers came in. You can have one big customer which would pull one big on one side, which will pull other. For example, if you look at shopping mall, if you bring a very big anchor, Zara or others, it might be enough for people to start coming, and then the other side, the other stores coming. And you can manage expectations. Again, convince the members of each group that the other group would come in a short while. Without it, you have a case of a long left tail, not being able to catch on. And if you are interested in that, in platforms, in introducing platforms into the market, it's a very nice book, The Matchmakers, it's a managerial book, but well written by non-economists about the tricks and the strategies of how to introduce platforms. Questions on that? Very well. With that, we finish the customer acquisition, and we move to customer profitability, really. But on the way, I want to talk about escaping the discount trap.
Professor
Yes.
Barak, I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned on the last slide the malls.
Yes.
And in the US, also around the world, there are many chains, for example, for clothes.
Yes.
For instance, in the US, which is a very large country, how do the equaling prices, where basically each state and each mall has its own taxes and I mean local taxes, not the federal taxes, of course. And rent and things like that.
But I can talk to you about it privately or after class, but it's a bit out of the issue here, and I'm not sure the rest of the class may be or may not be interested, but it's an interesting question. We can talk about it privately, but because it's above the network externality question, it's about managing retail, managing place, and it's a good question. But let's proceed, and if you want, we can talk privately on that. Let's talk about escaping the discount trap. And as I taught some people before class, actually it's a case about hospitals, but I also taught it in other courses which are not related to the healthcare industry at all, because it's an interesting case, I think. So what do we have there? We have the firm and the hospital. So the firm include Bossi Afaora, and just a second. There was a question, Yael, about costs, you say?
Yeah, Gabriel, I will say in your behalf, most of those strategies are very expensive. How startups can use them with low-cost options, like non-for-profits?
Most of the strategies are not necessarily very expensive. If you think about YouTube, when they started early on, it was just trying to convince via email, via social media, both sides of the other side. Again, you can. I recommend the book. The book dives into the issues. It's people go after platforms as a business model because they don't have money. If they would have had money, maybe they often would open a pipeline business. So most of them are used by not necessarily the big guys. Of course, if you have a commitment strategy, it's a big guy, it's Microsoft. But what you need is, it's actually the introduction of a new product, but you have two sides. You have to think of both. So if you are interested on how to do it with less money, there is a book which is called Growth Hacking. It's and another book which I recommend is The Lean Startup, which you might have seen. Again, these two are taking the position of a startup that doesn't have money, and what still they can do in order to create the demand early on for the new product. It's a bit out of line here to go into it. It's a whole thing, but again, I can put the names afterwards in the Moodle. Growth Hacking and the Lean Startup talk a lot about how to create the early demand, even if your resources are limited. So we are here at the escaping the discount trap, and again, talking about organizations with no money. So the hospital Santa Casa de Misericordia. My Spanish is not great these years.
It's Portuguese.
It's Portuguese. Okay, you're right. Brazil.
Misericordia. Yeah.
And then so the hospital doesn't have a lot of money, and it's a charity hospital, and we have Sergio Lins, the purchasing director, on their side, and for the firm Bossia Faora, we have the head of customer satisfaction, Augusto, who's really the manager there. We have Cora, the sales director, and Roberto, the local sales representative. And they're going to talk with the hospital about solution selling. But before that, and I ask you, and I want your view about the discount trap. Because this is not only the story of this hospital and company, and the discount trap that is described is something that many companies fall into, that they have to lower and lower the price and give discounts. And is it something which is unavoidable, I ask, or Bossia Faora can do something to mitigate it? Anything we can learn from the case that they can do, even with this kind of hospitals as customers? Anyone has a suggestion?
I think that what they did wrong maybe in this case is that they suggested something that wasn't valuable to the hospital, and maybe they have to do further research or find something that really is of need to the hospital, and so they can avoid the discount trap by proposing something that is valuable.
But you're right. I mean, we can talk about that. But before that, I'm talking about discount traps in general. About managing, before the question, what exactly value they gave to the hospital or not. Oli, what do you think? Can they do something, or are we all doomed for a discount trap?
I think it's very challenging. They are dealing with an hospital that is a public hospital, and they have budget limitations. But I agree with Osnat. They should do market research or advisory boards with the KOLs in these hospitals, with the nurses, with the payers, with the management, and to understand what are their unmet needs. How can they help them to fulfill those needs, and try to have a tailor-made package to these hospitals to give them value without decreasing the price. But I agree, it's challenging. They have competitors. They are there. They are waiting to take market shares, and they will need to see how they balance the price with the value that they can give.
So what both of you are saying is really, if they want to go out of this trap, they need to provide more value. If they provide more value, then the story would not necessarily price. Look at what is, which I agree, but look at other things, what is written in the case. For years, our sales reps have given bigger and bigger discount to sell more products, and prices and margin have dropped steadily. So the whole company has fallen into the price sinkhole, so it's going down with time. So one solution is just to show the value, bring better value. Is there anything else on the way that they can do to mitigate the problem, you think, of all these discounts?
Maybe they should change their commission system, because they said that their commission system was based on the amount of products sold, not the amount of profits or value added to the customer. So even their own personnel, their own sales people were not committed to raising the margins. They were just committed to sell quantity. So the discount was also good for the salespeople. It was a mechanism for them to sell more.
I very much agree, and look what indeed is written. Bossia Faora sales reps who were responsible for price negotiations were rewarded for quantity, not margins. and they had considerable control on the final offer. In some cases, they didn't even need an approval. So what I'm saying generally when I look at companies and I'm trying to see what they do and what they think and what they believe in, I look at the incentive system to the employees. I think that the incentive system teaches us very much. And in fact, they incentivize people to give these discounts because they were paid by a quantity. If you think about this chain that we talked about, so these salespeople, they promoted the product to get acquisition of new products via discounts. That's how they were incentivized, and of course they have the interest to sell as much as possible. If you look through the case, you see that the local representatives aligns more with the hospital than with the firm. This is the deal. He sells products, maybe they lose or not. He gets commission. I wonder how much some of you on that side see it as a problem in your life, or how companies or how firms or organizations are dealing with that.
Yeah, I was experienced such case. I worked for a company whose headquarters was in Germany, and every time they did business in South Korea, the local representative in South Korea was always covering and trying to be more like against the company instead of be with the company and against the customers. Because at the end of the day, they knew that the money will come from the customers and not from the company. So they tried to protect the customer, and they used to protect the claims of the customer for discounting and many other things. And every time we met with them, we just felt it.
And I think it's something which is very fundamental to the way B2B was created to some extent, the idea that salespeople get bonuses based on acquisition. Actually, the challenge is how to move them to look at lifetime value. So, and it's not a clear challenge because how do you look into the future? What do you promise? And so on. But we do see a movement of trying to think in other ways. If you only incentivize based on acquisition, what you'll get is acquisition, which is not necessarily profitable. And this is one thing I think that we can learn from that, beside the issue of course, of value. I want to talk now about solution selling, because for the company, it was a really big issue. I remind you about these touch points. These are opportunities to help hospitals and other medical practices, and they gradually began to reposition themselves as a provider of not only products, but also services, and so on. And why is it so important, in your view, to the company that they are willing to have such a fight with a major client? They really saw it as something big. Why? Because,
if I may, this will shift the strategy of the company from a positioning on price or prices to positioning on value. And if this contract works with such a difficult client, why is it a difficult client? Because it's a client that has been for 15 years, has a perspective of the company through prices and not through value. It means that the concept could be applied and scale up to much more clients.
And why, I want to push you a bit, Rafael, on that. You said it would move it to value more. Why this move to more service-like thinking increase the share of, or the importance of the value? What will it enable the firm to do?
Can I step in?
Yes.
I think that providing a service and not just a product is one of the most important things, is providing touch points, because then you're actually in contact with your customer, and which usually gives you a lot of customer
loyalty. Okay, so when you, first of all, it's a better way to learn your customer, know your customer, understand what the next, how to service them with things that they really need. And also, for instance, the company that I work at, that was really one of our big things over our competitors, was that we were a service company and not just a product company. And actually, one of the best things that were told about us was about our customer satisfaction, because we had many touch points with our customers. And that way, the customers were quite loyal to us. And in that way, I think it's very, very good. If you talk about value, it's very good for upselling when you know your customer, and you can sell more products and other products when the customer is loyal to you and he feels that he has more of a relationship with you and not just about your product.
And not just price. You're not focused, and discussion is not focused on price, because if you were selling only products, the discussion is just focused on price. How much for products? But if you switch discussion about value, it's completely different.
To my mind, it's a double win. It's a double win. They will win on shifting and creation of value, but they also win on extending the business. They will not be only on a product seller, but will also service with much more service to sell in the future. So it's a double win situation if they can close this client.
So I also just one last thing. I just also think that the company, when there's many touch points and you're also selling a service, the company, you're not just a company over there, Facebook, that I'm using their product, okay? Or maybe Facebook has service too, okay? But you're like a face to the customer. But
I'm concerned that we are missing a very important point, where Sergio specifically emphasized that this is Brazil and we look only on prices. So everything else that will come as added might not be value to be priced. So, and he gave also the example where the two guys just left the yard, where the film competitors, and he has no problem to buy from them, and he knows that all the other eco hospitals are looking on his purchase, and we'll try to align with him.
Mojik, let me try.
But if they set up, if they put in place within the hospital a specific study, for example, about with women with preeclampsia and so on, and they demonstrate that with this system they can save life and save money, perhaps at the end of the day, even the hospital will say, okay, I'm ready to pay a little bit more because I'm going to save life and even save money. So, but they need a demonstration, not only just for example, in the case he said that in general we know that, etc. But he needs a demonstration locally.
Before that, I agree, Beatrice, and I'll raise Moshik's question in a minute. But if this is Brazil and if it's really Brazil is only price. But before that, I want to summarize what some of you said. Think about this chain that we talked about. If what you argued is the following: when you become an ongoing touch point and more service thinking, you must consider constantly the customer need. It's not that you sold them once and then you threw the product. You need to consider it every day from the beginning. And you must better understand the customer perceived value. And you will also, because you are there all the time, in order you need to renew it all the time, you are there in the touch points, you have better idea of what the value that they want and you can give. And you said that it helps also not only in acquisition, but in development, selling more products. Once you are there, you say, wait a minute, they need also that and that, I can give also that, or develop it. And of retention, of loyalty, that you say, I give them more value. I'm there in many instances, they have an interest to stay with me. So, and I'll talk about it a bit more when I talk about lifetime value in a short while. But generally, this is something that had become mainstream thinking in the last 10 years in many industries. The idea that actually the way to look at your business is more as a service. And the service, because you'll be able to better understand and provide value better, you will increase the ability to develop customers, to retain them, and to acquire, and it would lead to higher customer equity. So that's the thinking of the company. What is interesting, the way that you described it, it should be also the interest of the hospital. I mean, they want also, at the end of the day, they treat people and they want value. But there seems to be a difference between the value matrix that the company sees and the value matrix that the hospital sees. Because the hospital opposes it, and the hospital more or less says, Sergio, tell them, I want to look at price. Don't tell me stories about value. And so I look at the price, and Sergio said, you know something, it has to benefit both parties. You must adopt our matrix where price is such a high importance. That is actually how I translate what it says to our value matrix. Now, one solution which Beatrice raised is maybe they need to demonstrate it better. Maybe they just didn't demonstrate it well enough, and that's why the hospital thinks that it's just the same in others and looks at price. I wonder, and I would be happy to hear also people who did not talk before, what can be done here? What can the company do, given that Sergio tells them about their own value matrix? They think that it's maybe a win-win, but they cannot convince. What can they do in order to convince?
They haven't really done a needs-based analysis yet. They're kind of enforcing their own ideas on what should be done onto the hospital, but what they're missing is like how they originally came to solution selling to begin with. It started from the ground. A cardiologist in a different hospital said, I would like you to partner with me to help patients. And so that's when they got behind the idea of solution selling. But what the company then tried to do is enforce that idea onto other hospitals rather than working with them to figure out what their needs are. So I think they have to start with understanding better what the needs are of their patients and then partnering together to come up with a solution that would benefit them both.
I think it's a very good point. I think that Randy says, and when you read indeed the case, I mean, they advocate solution selling, but they don't practice it themselves too much because they, instead of trying to adopt the thing to the hospital, they try to force solutions from other hospitals, for example. So that's one thing they can do. What else? What else can maybe another kind of thinking? Can they really break this? Because, you know, as Moshik said, he said, you know, this is Brazil. And they don't have money, and they can tell them stories about solutions as much as they want. But the hospital would be interested only in price. Is that really the case?
I had another idea here, Alex.
Okay.
And that is that they're discussing being essentially partners and working together with a hospital, but they're really putting all the risk on the hospital. They can do various kinds of joint ventures, either sharing the risks or doing the initial part for free and then asking the hospital to come along so they can share in the risk and also the profit. So they can do joint ventures and not just hand that bill to the hospital.
I think this is also a very good point. I mean, because you can share, if the hospital indeed is a poor hospital, they cannot take risks. You really believe in your solutions, then share the risk, or maybe give it for free. Why else might it be a good idea, Alex, to give it for free? I mean, I from what you read, and let's say that
evidence.
It's
you
like
have evidence based. So to show that the solution is with evidence, we have the clinical evidence and the outcome, and we can demonstrate the value of our product, whether it's within your hospital or whether this is done in other hospitals, which share the same features, but to show the value, the actual money that you get from using this saving tool or service or whatever, but to show it in a structured way and scientifically.
I agree, and I would ask the following, Yossi, then. Let's say that eventually they don't make money on this hospital because they give it for free. Even when they look, the evidence and so, but it's costly. It may still be worthwhile to give it free to the hospital. Why?
Because Sergio is an influencer. And once you get the value from his hospital, and we understood that the network is very important, then he is the one that now will be representing you and your solution to other hospital, and it makes the network bigger and easier to you to penetrate into other hospitals.
And indeed,
I disagree on that, by the way.
Okay.
Sorry. Just to comment. Dan.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. So I do agree that you can do perhaps some sort of a proof of value, that you can provide the product for a duration or until a specific objective is met for free. But from my experience, if you give something, a product for free, the amount, the seriousness, and how the perceptiveness of how the customer view this product goes down significantly than if he has some money invested, some skin in the game, essentially.
It can be. I agree. It can be, and it might not be for free, but for a large discount. And it's a good question. Maybe you don't want to give the discount at all, but you should take into account, I think we agree, when you decide on the price for this hospital, the effect of this hospital on other hospitals. We will call it, when we next talk about customer profitability, we will call it customer social value. So they have the profitability is not only a function of this hospital, but its effects on other hospitals around, and it should be taken into account in the calculation. But I want to talk about, and what you said is correct, of course, on all these points. I want to talk about another point. Another point when the people who really think of go into the negotiation should think about. If you recall, we talked about value to the customer. I presented the idea of the buying center. And I said, when we look at B2B, we don't sell to a person. We sell to an organization which is composed of different types of people. We have the deciders, the people who make the final decision, the approvers. We have the buyers, the purchasing people. We have the influencers within the organization. We have the users, and so on. Whom do they talk to here? Sergio, what is he? He's the buyer, right? He's the purchasing manager. Now, what is Sergio's value function? Because think of a buying center. Let's say you have here a CEO with all kinds. You have the CFO, you have the VP marketing, you have the others, and each one has a value function. Some of it, of course, are the same, but they have their own value function, partly based on the incentive. Now, if you have the purchasing manager, many of you work with purchasing managers. What is clearly the #1 priority of purchasing managers?
Price.
It's price. It's price. They're incentivized by that. It's not very clear that the value functions of the physician is the same, even in Brazil, where they have less money, or other people in the organization, or the manager of the hospital. When you go to a person whose claim to fame is on reducing price and try to selling something, now think about also what you told me. Instead of buying one time, you have an ongoing relationship. He may not be in control of the relationship. You'll deal directly with the physicians and so on. He loses control, and he's asked to maximize something, which is price. This is claim to fame, and you come with something else. It's no wonder that it's hard to overcoming. The question is, as people have raised about, for example, Beatrice, about the demonstration, shouldn't they go after other parts of the buying center? Shouldn't they talk to physicians, to others that will pressure the hospital, will pressure the buyer maybe, would be able better to see the point of view of the patient or the long-term effects? And again, Sergio does his job. I have no problem with Sergio, the question if Sergio is the problem person to talk to in that case. It's a buying center story. I don't know if you agree or not. I think that's something at least to think about. And again, Alex, what you say, it may be, I agree also, free. I'm not sure how you say free is never a great idea. Maybe on a short term it is as a demonstration. Discount and shared danger are clearly good ideas. In some cases, as with network externalities, we give initially things for free, but we do manage the lifetime value. We will not make money in the long run. And in that sense. So I think that, and I try to push it also when we talked about value to the customer, think buying center. A person does not represent the organization. There are other people, there are other values. And if you work on B2B, you must try to understand the value function of the different parts of the buying center and try to see how you may create the champion within the organization whose value function fits whatever you have to sell better than others. And the last thing, which I already mentioned, is the issue of the social value. He mentions when the Sergio says, you cannot do anything to me, I'm the influencer here in this area. And here's the question, I wonder if any of you had any experience. Can you really quantify that? Can you really quantify the amount that you might make or not because this hospital affects others? Because this will go into the decision how much discount, even if it's not for free, to give them. Can you quantify the social value of customers?
I know that there are places, again, without names, that few company can know the prices that each other get after 24 hours. And this is mainly critical when you sell things like semiconductors, like memories, where the price basically is defined in the end of the quarter, sometimes like it's an exchange. And it's a big volume market, and it's measured by cents to hundreds or even thousands of devices. And the customer just know and align the target prices after something like a day. So if a company get a discount, all the other just will know about it the day after.
Which means
so it is a critical things that to know who is leading things, and if you do to this person or this company a discount, you will know that all the other will be just asked for it, the same.
Which means that you have to have a smart pricing strategy and maybe not to base yourself only on discounts because issues of service and quality and relationship are harder to pass from one to the other, but it is a great challenge, I agree. And I want to talk a bit more about the challenge. It leads us really to the issue of customer profitability. Or what I dealt with, I talked with you, I mentioned a couple of times, customer lifetime value issues. And I want to talk about them. Just a second. Just a second. Before I share the screen. All right, now we'll share the screen. And actually, if you think of, we discussed the customer perceived value to a large extent, and we talked about customer acquisition, how fast customers are being acquired, and we moved to talk at least a bit about customer profitability. As I said also in the first class, the way that I think about the knowledge in this course is around this curve where you think of the value of an innovation, of any innovation. It's composed of really two parts. One of them is the graph of how new customers join with time. We just finished talking about customer acquisition. And the other one is the lifetime value or the profitability of each customer. And I say again, and I'll say it also later, it's not necessarily only about money. It can come from other sources, not for profit, but over time, adopters are giving us some value for which we do the innovation. Of course, the value that we give them would drive both the number of customers and the lifetime value. Now, in a sense, the whole thinking of lifetime value is a new thing. And I want to start with a story. And the story we say now, many of us say in the Passover Seder, Ma nishtana, which is what has changed. And the question is, what has changed? And a lot has changed. And in a sense, the marketing world is very different than the one that we've seen 20 years or 30 years ago, due to this change of moving from the product to the customer and the focus on customer profitability. And the classic world of marketing had been what we call a product-centric world. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a known statesman in the US in the 19th century, had a saying, one of the many, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. Build a better product and you will win. And this was the essence of companies for many years. What we need to do is just to build better products and tell about it to people and they will come. The idea is that let's get a good product and customers will come or we'll convince them to come. And this has been the base of classic marketing, branding, getting certain symbols or brand elements in order to represent you and tie associations to them that will understand what kind of product that we give, that customers will come. And the basic idea that we talked about also in the first class is that we as a firm do something, they think, the customers, and we sell. And we talked about segmentation, targeting, positioning. We'll talk about it in the next class. So we need to choose the right target market and position basically the product, what kind of solution we give. We have the tools of the marketing mix, the product, the price, the promotion, the place. And then the customers think, and they perceive some kind of value, and we sell. So historically, in monetary, at least, based firms, it was either about sales or market share. So customer perceive value and they buy. We don't necessarily understand how this happens, so how they get us money, because we don't necessarily follow them and know who they are, but they buy, and we give them better value, they buy more, we make more money. And this situation has changed. This focus, which is still today in many companies, is changing, and partly what we talked about, the move to services, is very much related to that. And what I want to tell you is about this change, which is really a fundamental shift in thinking in businesses. It's a move about what we call the customer-centric organization, which is different. And it has implications also for everything that you will do if you will introduce an innovation that has some longer term effect than just the first purchase. I have a suggestion now. The question, we got to 9 o'clock, and here's the suggestion. At 9:10, I can continue to record, but you don't have to be here. So if some of you are here, that's great. I can talk to myself as much as I I care because it's like it will be recorded, because I know it's 9 o'clock and many of you are after a day of work and you had the course before. If you have still the power, you're welcome to join, but please feel free to leave me now and watch what I record later. I'm going to talk about this whole change about customer lifetime value. If it will be too late, some of it I'll just stop and I'll record the rest of it later, but really feel free. I'll take now maybe a 5-minute break. And then those of you stay, you can stay and ask questions or not. Those who not, just watch the video, feel free, don't feel obliged to stay, because again, we don't want to keep you too much with Zoom, so I'll just take the opportunity to talk to some audience. It would be a better recording probably. But otherwise, if I don't see you after the break, please recall we have 3 weeks to the Cymbalta. It's an interesting case. It's not a simple case. I would suggest reading it more than once. And it's a good, again, it's a good case, not only because it's healthcare, it's related to you. People use it also in a general marketing situations, because it's a nice demonstration when we can see a product that could be positioned in 2 ways. And the question is, which one is better, which is an open question. And there's a lot of segmentation studies that the firm did, so we can look at how they actually do segmentation. And through this case, we can think about positioning, about segmentation, not only about how drugs are introduced to the market. So again, if it's a real problem for you, those who see it and who are in hospitals now and just cannot get out, then talk to us. But otherwise, we'll talk about Cymbalta 3 weeks from now. I take now a 5-minute break. So in 5 minutes, I'll be back and I'll talk about lifetime value for those who want to stay. Otherwise, I'll see you in 3 weeks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. So, Yael, am I well heard?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the classic world had been that of this product-centric. Let's see what happened. So one change came is the motivation. Many companies face the story of commoditization. Commoditization means that products become commodities. It's harder to differentiate these days. There's stiffer competition, weaker product-based differentiation. When I was young and you went to buy a television set, there were Sony and the rest. Sony had the Trinitron, better technology. It was clearly different. Today, when you go to buy a television set, you might have different price tiers, but you look at these stores and they all look rather the same. And some people say are made with the same components in some place in Thailand or in somewhere else. And so in that sense, it's much harder to differentiate today. The ability to imitate is much better. And when I talk about it with managers and others, they sometimes jump and say, wait a minute, what about the iPhone? So of course, the iPhone was indeed different, and it's still different to some extent. But look at the market. iPhone is 13% of the worldwide market. Most of the market are not iPhones, and many of them are really similar to each other, even in this category. It's harder to differentiate, so the idea that you have a product that will keep you profitable in the long run is not as simple as it used to be. Companies are looking for other sources of competitive advantage. The other issue is ability. It's a story of IT, being faster, cheaper, real-time, connected. And what you see on the right is the cost per gigabyte from 1980 to 2009. So we're talking about the move from around $1 million to 10 cents. And it's important because if you think about a terabyte hard drive that today costs a couple of 100 shekels here in Israel, almost all the companies that you come from can manage their customers for quite a while on 1 terabyte. It's just many of the things that I'll talk next, we knew always that it's a good idea to do, but it was hard, it was expensive. And now we can, much easier, in much easier way. We can because there are databases in which customers can be managed much more easily, because there's the internet, which enables us to get real-time information on customers, including who they are in contact with. And there is the mobile world, which enables us to follow customers where they are and be in touch with them constantly. So together, we can see the customers. If we look at the top row where customers were small, we didn't really see individuals. We look at this lady with the technologies that companies have today, they see everyone or some of them. And just an example where we're going to, and most of us are not, and hopefully are not, but I have a colleague which works with JD.com. JD is one of the equivalents of Amazon in China. So AliExpress, we all know, Alibaba, and JD is its largest competitor. And the advantage of JD is that they belong to a larger group, which is called Tencent. And Tencent holds, for example, WeChat, which is a very popular and usable social network in China, a communication network. And so my colleague told me that when you enter JD.com, they see data on you, which is the equivalent of having data on someone going in the US into the website, and you know what they purchased on Amazon, what they put on Facebook, what they search in Google, and what they tweeted in Twitter, combined. Based on that, they use models of 1 billion parameters in order just to answer the question of what should we recommend you to buy. Now, of course, this kind of data manipulation is not legal everywhere in the world, and the kind of knowledge that you need to know. Classic marketing people don't deal with such models. These are more computer science people. This is really big data. but think of the abilities. And in that sense, what happens today is that everything is documented. And even what we see around as the no cash world means that more and more you cannot pay with cash, more and more everything you do is documented. And in that sense, the ability to follow customers becomes better and better. From another angle, we have the software as a service story. Think of computer software. Historically, what companies do, clearly when they sold to organizations, is sold them the software and maybe gave them service. But if you think of what is going on today, companies will soon be running on software as a service only. And what we see that in already today, this is the majority. The majority of companies do not buy software. They rent software. And going back to the discussion that we had about service, about the hospital and the supplier, this is what happened to a large extent in this world. What is interesting that the SaaS, the software as a service, are leading some of the most sophisticated models of customer centricity today. These industries which focus on the product as the main component of business have moved to look at customer first, talking about retention and satisfaction in a quite interesting way. And when I thought about software as a service, I tried to think also of what do I consume today. And actually, towards this class, I thought I have Office 365, which the organization pays yearly for. I use Dropbox, the extended software I pay yearly for. I use Grammarly for grammar, for editing. I pay yearly. I use Zoom. We pay yearly. I don't buy software anymore. I rent it to some extent. It becomes a service, and when it becomes a service, they manage me as a customer. They know who I am. They know who I am. They can see if they retain me or not. They can think about my lifetime value. It's a new way to think about customers. So, and they can do it because technology enables them to manage me, which they couldn't do before. The third change is the issue of knowledge. Once companies begin to understand who their customers are, they begin to follow them and look at their profitability. And the leaders early on were financial services from all kinds, because they were able to follow their customers and really see how much money they bring, and they had the incentive to understand that. And they saw something interesting. Generally, when we think of market phenomena, we all often think about sort of normal phenomena. So if we think about our customers' profitability, we say, okay, probably on average, we have the average customers, and then we have some people on the left which are non-performers, probably a small percent, and a small percent of top performers. And then this is the way that generally we think also in business schools about the world, about market phenomena. But customers can be really different. What I show you now is the profit distribution of a US West Coast bank at the late 1980s, when people began to analyze the profitability of their customers. And what we see here, that the bank has 0.19% of its customers, which has a profit of more than $600 per household. And this 0.19% brings the bank $3 million out of the overall $5.5 million profit that they make. 0.19% brings 3 out of $5.5 million. Now, I'm sure that many of you have heard of Wilfredo Pareto. He's an Italian economist who late in the 19th century noticed that in Italy, 20% of the population holds 80% of the land. And this rule has become what we know as the Pareto rule, the 20-80 rule, which applies in many cases. Think about our bank. So two things. First of all, you know who they are. So it's not just 20%, 80, but you know who the people are. You know that Yael is a good customer and Barak is not a good customer. But then it's not necessarily 20-80. Here, it's more likely to be 2200. And you can say, how can it be 2200? But notice the left column. They lose on 60% of the customers. And it's not specific only to this bank. Many firms find out when they begin to do customer profitability analysis that actually they lose on many customers. So this bank knows that 0.19% brings him so much out of the profit. And once companies saw that, and once they understood they know who the different people are, they said to themselves, we cannot continue that way. We cannot continue giving this 0.19% of the customers the same service, the same price, the same advertising as others. These are really different markets. And the combination has changed the combination of motivation, ability, and knowledge has changed. And what we changed the way that companies look at markets. And actually, in terms of the knowledge, it's more reasonable to talk about what we call Pareto distribution in many markets, in which most of the customers do not bring us necessarily much profit, if at all, and only a small percentage bring us high profit. We see it again and again in analysis. This is colleagues of mine did it in what you see here are deciles of customers in a B2C company. The top 10% brings you on average $1,435. They lose money on the bottom 3%. Here you see what we call a customer pyramid. When you put the customers in sort of a pyramid structure with few relevant and profitable customers up here, most of the customers down here. In this case, a B2B company, 1% of the customers bring them 49% of the profit, 80% bring them 5% of the profit. Now, this is a bit skewed, even for companies, but I've seen skewer than that in B2B situations. And not only in B2B, in many situations, we see that the skewness of customer profitability is much more than managers think. One way to think about it is the following. Let's say that we are indeed in a Pareto world. So 20% of the customers bring us 80% of the profits. And how much would the profitability of the customers in the top 20% be larger than the profitability in the bottom 80%? So our intuition, typically when I ask students in class, they say something like about 4 times. The answer is 16, because think of the following. Let's say you have 100 units in the market. So 20 people bring you 80 units, each one brings 4. 80 people bring you 20 units, each one brings 0.25. Divide one by the other is 16. So when you have 20% of the customers that bring you 80% of the profits, the profitability of the 20% is 16 times the profitability of the bottom 80%. And this is a big difference. This is a big difference. And again, ability, motivation, knowledge has changed the world. And people say, okay, maybe we must also at least manage individual customers, move from a situation in which there's a product only and bring customers to a situation where you have customers and you think of the products to bring to them and manage the customer as an asset over time and find the products that will make him or her profitable. before I continue, any questions? Okay.
I'm sorry, everyone.
Okay.
Is it to move from one model to another?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's a gradual move. The product centric is still there, so we still manage products, but generally, I see a general shift more and more toward the customer centric model. What I'm saying, it's not that we don't manage products anymore, but the question, what's the focus of the company? There is a focus. For example, the SaaS company is much more focused on customers now. It's not that you need, again, I go back to the chain, you do not get lifetime value unless you give them value. So we need to give them value, we need to give them good products. But the thinking is different, and this is exactly what I want to talk about now. How is the thinking different? And customer centricity is, first of all, you focus much about value from the customer. So it's monetary value in most business cases, most of the cases that I teach out of this course for sure, but not always. It can be, as I said, also non-monetary. So you think about the profitability of customers. You think about customer lifetime value, the value of expected profitability of a single customer. I look at Rafael and I said, how much money am I going to get from Rafael in the future? This will determine how I will price the products to Rafael and what products I will try to sell to him. It might change the service that he gets, the promotion, and so on. So I look at Rafael as an asset and try to assess his profitability in order to make decisions. And I think about customer equity. So I say, but Rafael is not my only interest. I think of my whole customer base. So actually, what I argue when I teach about it, and I teach a full course about these issues, is probably this is the most important measure in any firm. Because at the end of the day, think of what we do. We manage we have a bunch of customers, each one would have some kind of lifetime value, and we try to increase the sum of all of it. So it's about value from the customer, but it's also about relationships. And it's not a coincidence that when we talk about this issue, often we talk about customer relationship management. It's a long-term.
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
Sorry, because my microphone doesn't work.
Okay, yeah.
So as you said on the pyramid, you showed that only most amount of the customers, majority of the customers, didn't bring value, didn't bring profit to the company. So when the customer centricity, so company should be for that customers who is bringing value, or so it will be for a minority of the customers?
It's a good question. And again, this is something which I can go into more. I teach a whole course on this issue, but there are different ways to think of it. I have a colleague in Wharton that claims that what you should do is focus on the top 20%, those who you think will bring you most money, and really manage them. And the rest, you should give them reasonable service or so, but you don't need to manage them necessarily individually on the same way that you manage others. It's not a clear question because when I teach it, I try to explain our aim is to maximize customer equity. So the question, for example, let's say you have the people in the top. Maybe they will stay in the top even if you don't do many things. Maybe they really like you, they have switching costs. Maybe what you should do is bring people from the middle to the top. Maybe that should be your emphasis. And maybe you should take into account another thing. How did these people get into the top? Did they start as small customers in the beginning and then gradually went up? If you will give bad value to all the small customers, maybe none of them would become a big customer afterwards. So maybe you need to lose on some customers early on to win the minority that actually becomes a more profitable customer afterwards. It's a good question. It's a whole discipline that deals with the question that you raised. At the end of the day, it's about managing customer equity. And many factors come in, it's not a simple answer. Maybe many companies, what they do, look at this kind of a pyramid that we have, the platinum, gold, silver, iron customers. This is a pyramid. Should you necessarily give all the perks to the platinum customers? It's a good question. It's a good question that companies argue. Maybe you need, should you do it at the expense of trying to convince gold customers to become platinum? Who is more important? Companies really struggle, and I cannot give an answer unless I see their assumptions in the customer equity model. So customer centricity is about relationships, because the base is that each new customer is the start of a relationship. People here in the chat talked about diabetes, but generally in most of healthcare, I just talked to someone now who informed me, I don't know, that if you look at the consumption of pharmaceutical products, for example, most of it is reoccurring. A lot of the needs are for chronic diseases. And when you have a chronic disease, this is lifetime value. You look at a patient and you see lifetime value, see retention, see the whole story that I'm talking about. So each customer is the start of a new relationship, and customers can also be developed. As we talked about when we talked about the case, you start buying X, but the minute that you have a relationship with me and I'm your supplier and I understand your needs more and more, I can follow your behavior, I can also sell you Y. So actually, I may lose money today to make profit later, and we know that in many cases, early on in the relationship, we lose money, almost by definition. We have customer acquisition cost, we spend money to acquire customer. At time zero, we are losing money. We acquire the customer on the promise that they will bring us lifetime value. So it's a longer term view, which does not necessarily fit the way that companies are looking at. And again, it's a view which fits viewing the customer as more as a member in a club rather than a one-time transaction. And the examples that we gave about the software as a service and are really relevant, but generally you think about, people talk today about the membership economy. Everything is becoming a service. The Dollar Shave Club example I gave you in the first class and others, it's about moving to become a service or membership. And so clearly that's the story of the software business today. I would say of marketing in general. The most highly cited marketing academic journal of the last 20 years is called, is talking about the need to move from a product-centric view to a service-centric view of relationship with customers. We are all providing service in a sense, even if we think that we just sell a product.
But this is not relevant for some industries like monopoles, utilities, mass transportation.
Gabriel, let me ask you the following. You have, for example, the utility. Let's think about utility is the electricity company in Israel. And I would say, I don't know how it is today that much, but they had at the time one of the best call centers in Israel, and they gave really good service on many aspects, better than private competitors. And the question is, why do they do that? You can say they're crazy, because if they are a monopoly, they shouldn't think about that. But there are two issues that you might think about. The first one is that regulators don't like it, and regulators represent the customer, and they demand that you think of people who you serve as a customer also in your, if you think about your local city, so the local government or generally of government ministries, they want to think of themselves as having customers. The other issue that if you're a monopoly today and you are used to a culture where you don't have customers, if you will have competition, it will be very hard to change, because many of them have changed from monopolies to being in competition. And we have so many examples in Israel and otherwise. And if you're in a culture in which you say, I don't care about my customers, when the competition comes, you are really doomed. So that would, I would argue, but still, you're right that the more competition you are, the more competitive you are, the more competition there is, the more you need to think about them. Now, but customer centricity is also about thinking about both sides of the relationship. It's not only the lifetime value that they give, but the value that we give them. And the story is that many brands, when they think of customers, when they talk to customers, they imagine or they portray this loving relationship. We love you, you love us, but actually sustaining a relationship is really not easy, as we know, with our family, friends, spouse, etc. And you have ups and downs, and it's not easy. You need to understand the other side. And even if you think that you are right and they are not right, it doesn't mean that you have to act as though you are the only one around and has the power. And so it's a lot about relationship management, understanding the value perceptions of customer. And I go back to what we talked about, the value to the customer. It's about perceived value. How do we really perceive us? What clues do they use? I may give them high value, but the clues are different. I think that I give high value. And then they don't see it. I manage a relationship. And I want to be profitable in the relationship, but it is still a relationship. Customer-centric managers recognize that customers do 3 things to create profit for the firm, and we talked about them. They come, so it's customer acquisition. We get new customer. They buy more. This is what we call customer development. We make more money of existing customers. We cross-sell, we upsell, we sell for a higher price, we increase the frequency, and they stay. We retain them. We encourage them to stay longer. And in that sense, when we think of customers, the same way that we saw how products go up and down, which is the product life cycle, we can think of a customer life cycle. So we reach the customers, we acquire them, we develop them, we retain them, we inspire them maybe to provide word of mouth. This is like a life cycle. And you may need different actions for different parts of the life cycle. I can give you an equivalent in healthcare. Think about the patient, say, that needs some help. So first of all, they have to recognize that they have a problem. Then they do the research of, to some extent, to who to go. Then they take action. Then they receive the care. Then they pay for the care. And then they have post-care issues, and they manage the health afterwards. This is also a life cycle of a patient and a certain problem. And you can think about increasing, again, however you measure profitability, monetary or not, how to intervene in different parts and how to understand the parts in order to increase the overall profitability of the customers. Someone asked here in the chat if people, Mila asked if customers also bring other customers. This is exactly what I talked about social value, and I will get to it to some extent in these slides, not too much, but I will give some examples of social value, because indeed customers bring value in 2 major ways. One is what they buy, and the other one is how they affect other people's buying. Now, following what I said before, customer-centric managers recognize that customers are not born equal. As I said, there's heterogeneity among customers in what they want from us and what they can give us. And this is going back to what you asked about the move from product-centric to customer-centric. This is maybe the big thing. The understanding that the heterogeneity among customers is the source of competitive advantage. Because if customers are the same, we don't care so much. More or less, they want the same and they give us the same. So no need to manage them. Just bring good products to the market and they will buy, and that will be fine. If there is a large heterogeneity, then you want to think elsewhere. Then you want to say they are not the same what they give me, and they're not the same what they want. And what you want to start maybe is that the people who really give you a lot to understand what is it that they want. So we recognize heterogeneity and look at it as a source of competitive advantage. Of course, in order to understand this heterogeneity, we must understand individual customers. Now, you might think that I'm talking also only about B2C in that sense. Say, B2B, know all of that. This is not far from the truth. So in fact, when I began to teach these issues, I thought the same. I said, you know, B2B companies know their customers, the B2C companies that the revolution is needed. But our understanding and research of B2B companies show how much they don't necessarily even understand the value that customers provide to them, because the value is spread in so many databases within the firm, so many places. Nobody really does a concentrated effort to look at the customer as a unit of analysis, in particular where different salespeople might serve the same customer. And you need to understand also exactly the value that they give. And we saw it in the case of the hospital and the supplying company. They didn't necessarily understand the needs of the hospital. They tried to just take from the other hospitals and impose the solution selling. They may not have so many customers, but it doesn't mean that they know their customers. So this thinking has brought us this customer profit chain that I talked about from the beginning of the course. If classic marketing have talked about the left side, about segmentation, targeting, position, marketing mix, customer perceived value, customer-centric marketing of today talks more and more also about the right side, moving from perceived value to the ability to acquire, development, and retain customers, and create lifetime value in the individual level and customer equity overall. And the more technology enables us data, the more we can, in an informed way, manage the customer mix and the customer profitability. And this is really the main story of competition in many industries today. Who will manage the customer? Who will get to them first? Because once you get to the customer and you have their trust, then you can develop them, then you can create alliances with other brands. And this is why Amazon and Google and Facebook and Microsoft all are fighting for us so much, because we have very limited attention span. We cannot be in touch with everyone. We cannot be engaged with everyone. Those who will be able to manage us will win.
Can I just ask a quick question?
May I ask a question?
Yes, I stop here.
Sorry. You were speaking about the first way to see segmentation, targeting, positioning, and nowadays there is a new way about the perception of a customer, and we speak about acquisition, development, and retention. But we can use both.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
It's all both. It's not all one part of the curve. Yeah.
Okay.
But think about the difference. I'll say for a minute. Think about the difference. Now, actually, it's interactive and it goes both ways, because when we look at the market, we need to see the whole chain. And then you say, for example, I look at a certain segment. Is it a segment which is easy to acquire? Is it, can I develop customers? Is it a segment, maybe it's not a lot of money, but I retain customers. And so the question is, and I look at segments not only by the benefits that I give customers, like you will see in the case. The case that I give you, the Cymbalta, is a classic case. It's more the classic STP, where you look at customers and say, what needs do they have? But you can say, I have segments based on the profitability I predict. So it's a combination. It's not that the left side has disappeared. Another question.
Thank you.
So you need, and actually it's quite complex. I want to tell you that to see this whole chain is really non-trivial. Not too many firms are seeing it well enough, because it really demands a deep understanding of customers and the whole process. Where I see companies that increasingly are able to manage the chain better is the digital world. digital-based companies, those who are on the internet, who manage customers, are first used to manage data. They have better access to data. And often they have managers who come from more technological worlds to begin with, and then they become managers, but then they feel more comfortable with analyzing data. And in these companies, you really see very smart utilizations of the firm, of this chain, and clearly in large companies like Google and Facebook, etc. But more and more, because the world becomes more digital and because the internet enables more and more data, we see managers moving to analyzing the full chain. And I want to tell you that those who do not necessarily stay in their job. We see a very high churn rate of marketing managers in the US, the CMOs. And the reason is that they are not able to explain the utility that they give to the firm, because customer centricity, the way that the minute that you talk about lifetime value, you are able also to talk to finance. The CEO, the CFO of the world, they talk about return on investment. They talk about cash flows. We in marketing historically talked about satisfaction and brand and all of it, which is good. But then they want to hear the story of cash flows. And the story of lifetime value and customer equity is the story of cash flows. We may have assumptions and so, but at least we have a model. We can talk to them and say, if you don't do that, this is what I expect. Because the return on investment, if you think about it, the investment is the 4 Ps, the product, price, promotion, place. The return is the customer equity. If you do not understand the full chain, your ability to tell the story of return on investment is very much limited. And it's not easy because it's an organizational chain. The way to move from, think of the company, the hospital, and the company that sold to it, from a world in which it was all about products and bonuses for new customers. You need to move to an organization who manages customers and their satisfaction and decides how to deal with different customers. And you need a lot of technology and numbers in order to make this decision on a wide scale. So it's an organizational change, which also drives long-term view, but this is the world that we are going into. Questions?
I have a quick question. So
Yes.
you talked a lot about data and how it's important for companies to see what individual customers are doing.
Yes.
But what I didn't hear talked about yet is the flip side of Big Brother, sort of like the ethical debates of collecting data on people. And you know what happened with Facebook, they kind of had that huge controversy come out with, you know, it turns out that they were collecting all this data on people without consent, and a lot of people left Facebook as a result. So where does that fit into the mix?
It's a whole story, and the privacy issue is a whole story. And you can talk about also the backlash in Europe with the GDPR. So you are much more restricted than before. I can tell you the following, you know, some people left Facebook, but still Facebook is so powerful. You would not believe, at least in the world that I look at, online worlds, mobile worlds, maybe unfortunately, but the world around us collects about us data all the time in ways which we don't even think about. Probably I will not talk about it today. In the next slide, I'll go some into it because it leads, I want to do pre-thinking about it. Think about, I mean, you know, there's issues of data privacy. It's more than that. Given this view, if you decide on service level based on the expected profitability, then what you will do is give some customers lowest level service or value wherever they go, because these people are disadvantaged and are not as good customers, and you manage individual profitability and you get all this data, and they will not even know, but wherever they go, the kind of offers they would get would be different than what you get. This is a big issue. I'm not sure we yet understand the meaning of it, I'm just finishing writing a paper about the effect of artificial intelligence, AI, on these issues. And part of the issue is that AI would make it much more extreme, because what AI would enable us, machine learning and others, really to take this and do it on a wider scale and a deeper scale. And we're going into a world in which more and more data, think of what Amazon is doing with Alexa. The amount of data gathered that is unbelievable. Now, there might be a backlash. There might be, people might say, we don't give you the data anymore. I don't see that. Whether it's good or bad, I see it's, well, you know, there are some going downs, but overall the graph is going up in the ability of managers to get data. I must say, though, that most companies do not really utilize the data yet. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to analyze it. But even if they would use 10% of what they had, they would do much smarter decisions. But it's changing. And then those who do, the Facebooks of the world, the Amazons of the world, really win. And then you see how Amazon really destroys the retail sector in the US to some extent, or affects it, create the retail catastrophe. And it's a lot because Amazon knows how to manage customers. They do a really good job, and we can think whether we like it or not, but this is the world that we will operate in. And in any case, even if we don't use this large-scale data, we must think that when we acquire a customer for anything, even if it's a drug or a new machine or something, we actually have a chance to begin a relationship with a customer lifetime values being there. And we must think of ways to predict and to understand the lifetime value of a customer.
My only comment on that is, I think what could happen is it could actually, all this collection of data could turn a lot of people off. And I know that the point is to retain customers over time, but it might have the opposite effect if a company is not careful about the way in which it manages its data.
I agree, but the question, what choice do people have? Amazon collects so much data about you, not less than Facebook, in my view. But then some customers, but then half of the US households have Amazon Prime. And so many people buy with Amazon. Does the fact that Amazon knows all these things about them and uses Alexa and so, does it turn them off? I don't see that. I agree that it might be something that some people will take into account, but if the ability of firms would be to give them the right offer with the right product and the right price at the right time, many of them would, I think, not put the focus on privacy. Maybe it's wrong. I mean, maybe it's bad for the world. I'm also quite worried about what's going on. But it's an empirical question. Would there be backlash? Would governments? I think that it will not change until regulators would get in. And they get in to some extent. In Europe, they did, but still, we see the trend. The trend is for everything that we do, just bring more data. And if it doesn't come from here, it comes from there. And it will be a world where we'll be able to manage customers. Now, people ask, how can we control the data that is being collected about us? So in some cases you can. For example, I mean, you can go into Google and ask to delete some of the things. You can go into other applications. But most customers, you know, for example, on Facebook, you can do all kinds of things in order to tell them not to collect the data on you, or not to let others see your data, but you have to do it. At the time, it was in 16 different places. And very rarely people did that. How many of you always search incognito? How many of you understand, for example, when Facebook, you have Facebook on your phone, Facebook looks at what you do at other apps, not on Facebook, in order to understand who you are and sell you afterwards to others as advertisers. So they look at other apps that you use, and actually you gave them the permission when you downloaded Facebook. And you gave so many people the permission, even if you don't know that. So it's a big question. Again, it's a big issue. It's a big public policy issue. What is clear is that companies have a lot of data today. Probably they will have more tomorrow. They might be restricted to some extent and so, but data is coming. And think about the IoT, Internet of Things. It will give so many data. Your computer will give data. Your refrigerator would give data. Your washing machine will give data. Your printer already today, when you install an HP printer, they tell you we can give you some perks if you would let us get data on how you use the printer. Try it. That's what they do. And most people don't carry. And so the overall, in my case, the overall story is that you will be able to better analyze and manage the customer lifetime value, which is why people say that customer lifetime value is the only metric that matters, and goal guiding and so on. And actually also in healthcare, you see more and more people writing about lifetime value in healthcare of the patients and so on. Even, and this is more in case of a for-profit organizations, or at least looking at monetary profitability, but you can think about value also in other ways. I've kept you for quite a long time. What I'll do, I'll probably record the rest of this presentation. What I'll talk more about some aspects of lifetime value and social value. And we'll finish with that, and we may go back to it in the last meeting. Maybe I'll talk more about customer retention or about branding. We'll see how we proceed in the next meeting. Thank you for being so patient that late at night. And otherwise, I'll see you when we'll talk about Cymbalta, right after Passover. Have a nice Passover and really, really keep safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Pesach
you.
Kasher v'Sameach.
Happy Passover.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.